The 80s stand as a pivotal decade in the history of video games, marking the transition from a nascent curiosity to a global cultural phenomenon. Defined by innovation, growth, and a few tumultuous setbacks, the era laid the foundation for the modern gaming industry. From the arcade boom to the emergence of home consoles, the 80s offered gamers a rich and varied experience while pushing technological boundaries. The decade began with the peak of the golden age of arcade games, a phenomenon that had started in the late 70s. Titles like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong became cultural touchstones, captivating millions with their simple yet addictive gameplay. Arcades became social hubs where players competed for high scores and bragging rights. Pac-Man, developed by Namco, introduced a universal appeal, breaking free from the traditional shoot-'em-up mechanics of earlier games like Space Invaders. Its maze chase gameplay, combined with its titular character's charming design, turned it into a global sensation. Similarly, Donkey Kong, a Nintendo creation, marked the debut of Mario, then known as Jumpman, one of gaming's most iconic characters. The graphics and sounds of arcade games also saw significant improvements throughout the decade. Titles like Dragon's Lair used Laserdisc technology to deliver animated, cinematic visuals far beyond what had been seen before. Meanwhile, Street Fighter set the stage for the future dominance of fighting games with its competitive multiplayer format. Despite the industry's meteoric rise, it faced a near-catastrophic downturn in 1983, especially in North America. Known as the video game crash of 1983, the event was caused by market saturation and a flood of low-quality games. Atari, the dominant home console manufacturer of the time, suffered heavily due to poorly received titles such as E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Pac-Man for the Atari 2600. The crash led to a massive decline in revenues and consumer confidence. Many companies went bankrupt, and it seemed for a moment that video games might fade into obscurity. However, this period of turmoil set the stage for a reinvention of the industry. In the mid-80s, the industry saw a resurgence, largely thanks to the efforts of Japanese companies. Nintendo's release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, in 1985 was a turning point. Originally launched as the Famicom in Japan in 1983, the NES came to dominate the global market with its robust hardware, quality games, and strict licensing policies that prevented the flood of low-quality titles that had caused the earlier crash. The NES introduced players to timeless classics such as Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Metroid. These games offered not only improved graphics and sound, but also deeper narratives and gameplay mechanics, showcasing the potential of video games as an art form. Other companies followed suit. Sega, for instance, released the Sega Master System to compete with the NES. Though it was less successful in the USA, it laid the groundwork for Sega's later successes. By the end of the decade, the rivalry between Nintendo and Sega would begin to shape the industry's future. While consoles and arcades dominated public attention, the 1980s also witnessed the rise of personal computers as gaming platforms. Machines like the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and Apple II opened up new possibilities for game developers. The affordability of home computers enabled hobbyists and smaller studios to create innovative games that often pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Titles like Elite, a space trading and combat simulator, demonstrated the potential for open-ended gameplay and procedural generation. Meanwhile, text-based adventures like Zork and King's Quest introduced players to narrative-driven experiences that emphasize storytelling and player choice. The personal computer gaming market also saw the emergence of new genres, including real-time strategy, with games like Herzog Zwei laying the groundwork for the genre's future evolution. The 80s were a time of rapid technological advancements in gaming. From graphical improvements to the introduction of sound chips, developers constantly pushed the limits of what was possible. The use of 8-bit microprocessors in consoles and computers allowed for greater complexity in game design, while the transition to 16-bit systems at the end of the decade hinted at the future of the industry. Innovations in controllers also enhanced gameplay. The NES's directional pad, or D-pad, became the standard for decades, offering a more precise and intuitive way to control games compared to the joystick. Additionally, the 80s saw the birth of multiplayer gaming. While arcades had long encouraged face-to-face competition, consoles like the NES introduced simultaneous multiplayer gameplay in titles such as Contra, fostering collaboration and camaraderie. The video games of the 80s transcended their status as mere entertainment to become cultural landmarks. Characters like Mario, Link, and Pac-Man became household names, appearing in merchandise, cartoons, and even movies. Games also began to influence other media, with iconic soundtracks like the Legend of Zelda's overworld theme becoming ingrained in popular culture. Moreover, the decade saw the rise of video game magazines like Nintendo Power, which helped foster a sense of community among gamers. These publications provided tips, reviews, and previews, giving players a deeper connection to the hobby. The 80s were a defining decade for video games, transforming them from a niche pastime into a global industry. From the highs of the arcade boom to the lows of the 1983 crash and the resurgence led by Nintendo and other innovators, the era was one of growth, experimentation, and resilience. It set the stage for the technological advancements and cultural shifts that would follow, leaving an indelible mark on the world of entertainment. As we look back on the 80s, it's clear that this was more than just a formative period. It was the foundation of an industry that continues to captivate and inspire millions worldwide.